It was supposed to be the most ordinary afternoon imaginable. School pickup had just ended, and my kid was out front riding a scooter in the driveway, helmet on, backpack still slung over one shoulder. I was inside the house, folding laundry, half listening through the open window the way parents do when everything feels normal and safe. That sense of safety shattered in seconds. A dark SUV rolled slowly past the house, then stopped. Two men stepped out wearing matching polos with bold lettering that said, HOA enforcement. Clipboards. Lanyards. Fake confidence. The whole costume was designed to look official enough that people wouldn't question it, especially kids. I noticed them through the window when my kid suddenly stopped scooting and stood still. One of the men crouched down to my kid's level. I couldn't hear everything he said, but I heard enough to make my blood run cold. Hey buddy, we need you to come with us for a minute. Your parents are aware. That's when my training kicked in. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about me. I'm not loud about my past. I don't wear hats, shirts, or bumper stickers. I served quietly, did my time, and came home to build a peaceful life for my family. I don't look intimidating. I look like any other suburban dad. That's exactly why they didn't realize how badly they'd miscalculated. I stepped outside calmly, no yelling, no running. Just presence. The moment they saw me, their posture changed, but not enough. They doubled down, telling me there had been a compliance issue involving my property and that my child needed to be temporarily relocated while it was resolved. That word, relocated, told me everything. I asked for ID. They flashed badges too quickly. I asked for paperwork. They deflected. I asked which HOA they represented. Wrong name. Wrong address. Wrong kid. I told my child to step behind me and go inside. One of the men reached out like he was going to stop them. That was the last mistake they made. What happened next was fast, controlled, and decisive, not because of anger but because of training. There was no shouting. No chaos. Just two men who suddenly realized that pretending to be authority around the wrong family carries consequences. By the time neighbors came running outside, the situation was already over, and my kid was inside, safe, and locked in the bathroom like we'd practiced. Sirens were already on the way. And standing in my driveway, staring at the reality they'd created, the fake HOA enforcers finally understood something they should have known from the start. They hadn't just crossed a line. They'd crossed the wrong father. The police arrived faster than I expected, lights washing over the houses as neighbors gathered at a cautious distance. The two men were on the ground, wrists pinned, breathing hard and suddenly very quiet. I had already stepped back, hands visible, posture relaxed. When officers see calm instead of chaos, it tells them a lot before anyone speaks. I identified myself, gave my name, and immediately told them my child was inside and unharmed. An officer split off to check on my kid while another started questioning the men. Their story unraveled almost instantly. They claimed they were contractors, then security, then HOA compliance partners. Each version contradicted the last. One officer asked the question that mattered. Which HOA? They gave the same wrong name again. That's when I knew this wasn't just intimidation. This was targeted. The police separated them and ran their IDs. Both came back with priors, nothing violent, but enough to show a pattern of fraud and impersonation. One had a recent charge involving unlawful detainment that had been dropped due to lack of evidence. The other had a restraining order filed by a family 2 towns over. My stomach tightened. An officer came back from inside the house and quietly told me my kid was shaken, but okay. That mattered more than anything else. I thanked him, then turned back to the driveway where the truth was starting to surface. The SUV didn't belong to either man. The plates were registered to a shell company created less than 3 months earlier. Inside the vehicle, police found zip ties, printed violation notices, and a tablet with a spreadsheet listing addresses, school schedules, and family notes. That's when the mood shifted. This wasn't an HOA issue. This was something much darker. The officer leading the scene asked me how they knew my child's name. I told him I'd been wondering the same thing. I don't post my kid online. I don't talk to neighbors much. And I definitely don't share schedules. The answer came from the tablet. They'd been watching. Another patrol unit arrived, followed by a plainclothes detective. The street was locked down. Neighbors were told to go back inside. What had started as a fake fine had escalated into a full criminal investigation in under 20 minutes. The detective asked me to walk him through everything again, slowly. I did. No emotion. Just facts. Training teaches you that details matter more than tone. Every word can become a line in a report that decides how far justice goes. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "You did exactly the right thing." That's not praise. That's confirmation. One of the men finally cracked. He admitted they'd been hired through an online forum to pressure families during HOA disputes. The job paid extra if kids were involved, because parents were more likely to comply quickly. The detective's jaw tightened. They weren't expecting resistance. They weren't expecting preparation. And they definitely weren't expecting a father who knew how to stay calm when everything inside him wanted to explode. As the men were loaded into separate cruisers, one of them looked back at me. Not angry, not defiant, just scared. He realized something too late. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. And it was only just beginning to unravel. By nightfall, our quiet street no longer felt familiar. Police tape stretched across driveways. Unmarked cars idled with engines running. Neighbors whispered in clusters, replaying what they'd seen from behind curtains and door frames. For years, people treated HOA drama like harmless nonsense, annoying letters, petty fines, passive-aggressive emails. That illusion was gone. Inside the house, my kids sat wrapped in a blanket on the couch, gripping a juice box they weren't drinking. I knelt down, looked them in the eyes, and told them the truth in the calmest words I could find. They were safe, the bad men were gone, and none of this was their fault. We practiced breathing together, just like we always had.
In.
Hold.
Out.
Control what you can control. Another knock came at the door. This time it wasn't uniformed patrol. 2 detectives stepped in, credentials clear, voices low. They asked if we could talk privately. I stepped outside with them, closing the door behind me. Some conversations don't belong within earshot of kids. They told me what they'd already uncovered in just a few hours. The fake enforcers weren't working alone. Similar incidents had been reported across 3 counties, always near HOA communities, always involving families with minor disputes, and always escalating fast. In 2 cases, kids had been physically grabbed before parents intervened. Charges hadn't stuck because the perpetrators vanished. Until now. The detectives asked how prepared my family was. I understood what they were really asking. Had we planned for this kind of scenario? I told them yes. Not because I expected something like this, but because responsibility doesn't care about probabilities. It only cares about outcomes. They nodded. One detective admitted something quietly, almost reluctantly. If you hadn't been home, this could have ended very differently. That thought hit harder than any confrontation earlier that day. Later that night, after the house finally went quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Anger tried to creep in, but I didn't let it stay. Anger clouds judgment. What I felt instead was resolve. Someone had tried to turn bureaucracy into a weapon, fear into leverage, and children into pressure points. That doesn't get shrugged off. The next morning, my phone started ringing. First, a number I didn't recognize, an attorney representing the HOA. He spoke fast, nervous, claiming the association had no affiliation whatsoever with the individuals involved. I told him to put everything in writing and contact law enforcement. Then I hung up. An hour later, the HOA president emailed the entire neighborhood, calling the incident an unfortunate misunderstanding and asking residents not to speculate. That email became evidence within minutes. The detectives wanted everything: emails, letters, violation notices, timestamps. HOA overreach thrives in paper trails, and this one was long. Neighbors began coming by, one at a time. Some brought food. Some brought apologies. A few admitted they'd seen suspicious people weeks earlier but assumed it was HOA stuff. That assumption haunted them now. By afternoon, news vans appeared at the end of the street. I declined interviews. This wasn't about attention. It was about accountability. A detective called later with an update. Search warrants were being executed on the shell company tied to the SUV. Financial records linked payments back to a third-party compliance consulting firm that marketed itself to HOAs as an aggressive enforcement solution. Aggressive. That word kept echoing. Aggressive enforcement had almost cost my kid their safety. That night, I tucked my child into bed and stayed until their breathing evened out. As I turned off the light, I made a quiet promise, not just as a father, but as someone who understands threats clearly. This wouldn't end with arrests. It would end with exposure. The exposure started sooner than anyone expected. 2 days later, detectives asked me to come down to the station, not as a suspect, not even as a witness anymore, but as someone whose evidence had connections they didn't know existed yet. On the table in front of me were printed emails, contracts, and payment records. What looked like chaos was actually a pattern. The so-called compliance consulting firm wasn't just advising HOAs. They were scripting escalation. Step-by-step playbooks on how to intimidate residents, how to apply pressure, and when to introduce fear. Kids weren't an accident. They were a tactic. One detective slid a page across the table. Highlighted text read, "Presence of minors increases compliance rates by 64% when authority appearance is maintained." I felt my jaw tighten, but my voice stayed level. Losing control never helps. Asked how many HOAs were involved. More than we're comfortable with, he said. Some associations had signed contracts knowingly. Others claimed ignorance, insisting the firm went beyond its mandate. But emails told a different story. HOA boards asking for stronger measures. Presidents demanding results. Fines weren't working anymore. Fear was faster. That afternoon, arrests expanded. Not just the 2 fake enforcers, but mid-level coordinators. A manager who handled scheduling. Another who provided uniforms and badges. Each one talked a little more than the last. When pressure is applied legally and patiently, lies collapse under their own weight. By evening, my attorney called. Yes, I had one now. He told me to stop answering the phone personally. Lawsuits were coming, not just criminal charges, but civil ones. Families from other counties were stepping forward. Some kids had nightmares. Some parents had complied out of fear and shame. All of them had paperwork tying back to the same firm. The HOA that fined me for noise suddenly went silent. No emails. No letters. No notices taped to doors. Silence can be louder than threats. Then came the internal collapse. Board members resigned for personal reasons. Emergency meetings were canceled. The HOA president's social media vanished overnight. Neighbors who once enforced rules with smug authority suddenly avoided eye contact at the mailbox. Accountability has a way of rearranging social hierarchies. A week later, the district attorney held a press conference. I watched from home, sitting beside my kid, who was finally laughing again at a cartoon on TV. The DA didn't mention my name, and that was fine. He spoke about impersonation, conspiracy, attempted unlawful detainment, and organized coercion. He spoke about how authority is meaningless without legitimacy. Most importantly, he spoke about children. This case, he said, will change how enforcement contractors are regulated in this state. That's when it sank in. This wasn't just about us anymore. Late that night, I walked the perimeter of the house, not out of fear, but out of habit. Everything was quiet. Street lights hummed. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, but it wasn't. Trust, once cracked, doesn't go back to factory settings. My kid asked me a question before bed. Are they coming back? I shook my head. No. And even if they tried, they can't hide anymore. That answer wasn't bravado. It was truth. Because once light hits something built in the shadows, it either changes or it burns. And the people who thought they could weaponize fake authority against families were about to learn how unforgiving daylight can be. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves. First were the court filings, thick envelopes, certified mail, names I recognized and others I didn't. Class actions. Individual suits. Emergency injunctions against enforcement contracts. HOAs that once moved with casual confidence were suddenly drowning in legal language they couldn't ignore or fine away. Then came the apologies. Some were public statements drafted by attorneys, carefully worded and completely hollow. Others were private, emails from neighbors who'd once nodded along while fines were handed out like candy. A few even knocked on the door, eyes down, voices shaky, admitting they believed authority mattered more than asking questions. I listened. I didn't argue. Accountability doesn't need shouting. The consulting firm folded within 3 weeks. Their website vanished. Phone numbers disconnected. Bank accounts frozen. The people at the top tried to disappear, but paper trails don't forget. Especially when investigators already know where to look. One morning, while making breakfast, I watched my kid laughing at the table, completely absorbed in something silly and unimportant, the way kids should be. That moment mattered more than every arrest, every lawsuit, every headline. Safety isn't about winning. It's about returning to normal without pretending nothing happened. We didn't move. That surprised some people. They expected us to leave, to find a quieter place, to retreat. But leaving would have meant letting fear decide for us. Instead, we stayed and quietly helped other families understand their rights. Not through speeches, through documents, through timelines, through showing them that authority without legitimacy is just noise. HOA meetings changed fast after that. Attendance doubled. Questions got sharper. Boards learned the hard way that intimidation only works when people are isolated. Once neighbors talk to each other, the entire power structure shifts. Rules still existed, but now they had scrutiny, transparency, and consequences. Months later, a detective I'd worked with called to check in. Charges had escalated. Sentencing was coming. One of the original enforcers had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony. He admitted they were trained to look confident, speak quickly, and target whoever seemed least likely to push back. Families, he said. Parents with kids. That confirmed what I already knew. Predators, whether criminals or bureaucrats, rely on hesitation, on politeness, on the assumption that no one would dare challenge someone wearing a badge, even a fake one. The moment that assumption breaks, everything changes. My kid doesn't remember every detail now. And that's okay. What they remember is that when something felt wrong, it stopped. That adults listened. That home stayed safe. That lesson will outlast any HOA. Sometimes I still walk the driveway at night, listening to the quiet. Not because I'm afraid, but because awareness is a habit you never unlearn. Peace isn't passive. It's maintained. The neighborhood eventually settled back into routine. Lawns trimmed. Packages delivered. Kids playing outside again. But there's a difference now. People ask questions. They verify. They don't confuse uniforms with authority anymore. And that might be the most lasting change of all. Because the truth is simple, even if the system isn't. No fine, no letter, no fake badge is worth more than a child's safety. And anyone who forgets that, anyone who tries to weaponize rules against families, should remember this story clearly. Not as a warning, as a record. Because the moment they crossed into my driveway thinking fear would protect them, was the moment they learned something permanent. Real authority doesn't need to pretend. And real parents don't hesitate.